Oh my goodness, look at all this. Yeah. You're a millionaire.
Congratulations.
It is so good to see you again.
Yes, we have your account ready for you.
We can help you with anything you need.
The lobby of the bank was alive that morning, humming with the rhythm of routine commerce. Sunlight streamed generously through the broad glass facade, falling in radiant sheets across the polished marble floor. The morning's golden rays bounced off the shiny columns and glass counters, scattering light in dazzling fragments that made the whole hall gleam as if dusted with quiet grandeur. The faint scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the sterile coolness of conditioned air. Shoes clicked, heels tapped, and the soft murmur of voices filled the cavernous room, weaving a tapestry of sound that spoke of urgency, ambition, and impatience. Men in sharply pressed suits leaned against the walls, scrolling feverishly through their phones, thumbs tapping with restless precision. Women with tailored blouses clutched leather handbags and folders brimming with documents, their eyes darting toward the oversized wall clock as if its hands were moving too slowly for their liking. Secretaries whispered hurriedly into Bluetooth earpieces. Young professionals clutched deposit slips, and retirees clung to their passbooks like lifelines. Everything about the scene reflected a society intent on progress, wealth, and appearances. Into this carefully curated world stepped a figure who seemed to come from another era entirely. Mr. Harlan, though many only knew him as that old man in the straw hat, moved with the kind of slowness that carried both dignity and the weight of years. His tall frame was stooped ever so slightly, his gray beard long and uneven, his face marked with creases carved by decades of labor under the sun. His clothes were simple to the point of shabby, a faded checkered shirt, sleeves rolled at the forearms, the fabric worn so thin it looked nearly translucent in places. His jeans were torn along the knees, not by fashion but by the honest erosion of time. Atop his head rested a straw hat, weather-beaten but sturdy, shielding him from the blazing light he had just walked through outside. He clutched a battered leather wallet, one that had clearly been with him through countless seasons, in his calloused, roughened hands. Hands that bore the map of his life, thick veins, hardened skin, and scars that spoke of real work, not office tasks or conference calls. He paused just inside the entrance, blinking briefly against the shift from sun to shade before slowly making his way to the back of the line. And as always, the moment he appeared, the atmosphere shifted, eyes turned, brows furrowed. A hush swept briefly over the crowd before dissolving again into whispers and stares. Customers in their tailored jackets and polished shoes gave him sideways glances, some pitying, some judgmental, most dismissive. He looked out of place in the gleaming lobby, like a farmer who had wandered into a royal ball. Even the bank staff, who prided themselves on courteous professionalism, found it difficult to mask their reluctance when he approached. Mr. Harlan had been here before. Each visit carried the same invisible weight, the silent judgment of those who measured worth in fabrics, shoes, cars, and titles. He had grown used to it, though the sting never disappeared entirely. It pressed down on him now, heavy and familiar, as he stood quietly in line. But he had come for something simple today. He wanted only to check his balance, to confirm that everything remained secure. For a man like him, such a task was ordinary. But for those around him, it seemed extraordinary that he was even here. From inside his glass-walled office, the branch manager, Victor Morrow, emerged like a stage actor stepping into his scene. Young, striking, and self-assured, Victor looked every inch the man who belonged at the top of the room. His dark navy suit was perfectly cut, hugging his athletic frame. A red silk tie knotted sharply at his collar, and the silver watch gleaming on his wrist screamed of wealth and status. His hair was slicked back with precision, and even his stride carried a rhythm of command. Victor thrived on control and the illusion of superiority. He measured people by appearance, and his confidence was often mistaken for competence. When his eyes landed on Mr. Harlan in line, his lips curled into a smirk. Nudging the clerk beside him, he whispered something under his breath that made the younger man chuckle. But Victor wasn't content with private mockery. He raised his voice, projecting with the kind of careless cruelty that craves an audience. "If you even have a balance, old man," Victor sneered, his tone dripping with disdain, "I'll pay you double." The words sliced through the lobby like a razor. Conversations faltered, phones lowered. A ripple of silence spread outward as customers turned their heads, some raising their brows in shock, others smirking in agreement, all waiting for the old man's reaction. Mr. Harlan felt the familiar sting. His shoulders drooped slightly, his gaze dropped to the marble floor. For years he had endured such mockery from men who measured worth by wallets and appearances. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. Dignity, he knew, was not found in loud words. What Victor didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this weathered figure in faded jeans was no ordinary customer. He was the silent owner of the very bank they worked in, the man who had built its foundations brick by brick, who had given others opportunity while living simply himself. Wealth to him was never a costume to wear but a responsibility to carry. The clerk at the counter finally called him forward, voice tinged with amusement after Victor's jibe. Mr. Harlan stepped slowly, handed over his ID and stood waiting. The clerk began typing, smirk plastered on his face, until the numbers appeared. His fingers froze, his smirk collapsed into disbelief. Zero after zero filled the screen, the kind of fortune that could purchase the building they stood in several times over. His eyes widened, throat tightening, and he leaned closer to the monitor as though proximity might change the digits staring back at him. His mouth moved silently before he whispered, "Sir, your account," and stopped himself, remembering Victor's watchful eyes. Victor, sensing hesitation, strode forward, chuckling. "Come now, don't tell me he actually has something in there." With a careless snatch, he pulled the paper slip from the printer. His laughter echoed until it abruptly cut off. The blood drained from his face. The color in his cheeks disappeared. His hands trembled as his eyes darted across the printed balance, confirming what he could not believe. The old man he had mocked was not only wealthy, he was the wealthiest presence in the room. More than that, he was the very man whose silent approval determined Victor's future. The bank froze. Customers leaned forward, whispering urgently to each other. Clerks exchanged nervous glances. The air seemed heavier, denser, pressing down on every person present. Mr. Harlan, still calm and quiet, retrieved the slip, folded it neatly, and tucked it into his worn wallet. Then, with a voice steady and deep, not loud but resonant, he looked at Victor. "The real balance we carry," he said softly, "isn't in a bank account. It's in how we treat others." The words thundered louder than any raised voice. He turned, slow steps echoing across marble that suddenly sounded like drums. Victor's chest tightened, his breath quickened, his pride shriveled to dust. Every polished surface seemed now a mirror, reflecting not his power but his cruelty. But Mr. Harlan wasn't finished. At the door, he paused, turned slightly, and spoke not to Victor alone, but to everyone. "I grew up with nothing," he said, voice carrying warmth that spread across the lobby. "Every dollar I earned came from sweat, sacrifice, and patience. I built this bank not to make men arrogant, but to give families hope. To remind us that respect must come before wealth. If you see someone who looks tired, worn, or poor, remember, you don't know the storms they've survived. Treat them with the dignity you would want for yourself." The room held its breath. A mother near the back clutched her child tighter, tears glistening in her eyes. An older man pressed his hand to his chest, nodding slowly. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed to still, as if time itself bowed to the truth in his words. Victor stood paralyzed, his arrogance turned to ash. For the first time in years, he felt not powerful, but small, not admired, but despised. And so, the story of that day spread like wildfire, first through whispers in the lobby, then through stories across town, and finally across the very boardroom of the corporate tower. Days later, Victor found himself called into a meeting with the directors. At the head of the long, polished table sat Mr. Harlan, no longer in his straw hat, but in a simple grey suit. He did not gloat. He did not scold. He only said with quiet disappointment, "Leadership isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how kindly you treat the smallest voice in the room." Victor resigned soon after. Staff who once admired his sharpness now worked with renewed humility. Customers entered the bank with reverence, remembering the story of the old man in the straw hat, and Mr. Harlan lived on as he always had, quietly, humbly, with dignity as his truest form of wealth. In time, his story became a legend, a reminder that appearances deceive, but character never does.